I am channeling my inner Julia Child today and gonna take a run at her French onion soup. Onion soup, a large bowl of it bubbling under a brown crust of cheese. Its rich aroma, its wonderful flavor and savor have made French onion soup a world favorite. Onion soup is simply a large quantity of sliced onions, slowly cooked and browned in butter, then simmered in beef bouillon. This recipe makes me happy every time I make it. Kind of a celebration of all things bouillon, as Julia calls it, and onion, which, how can you go wrong with those two flavors? Hello, welcome back to my kitchen. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today and gonna take a run at French onion soup. This one actually isn't that hard. It just takes some time to cook the onions down appropriately, and if you start with a really hearty beef stock, which I have here, and I'll link up above for you, I made it earlier this week, you're already kind of halfway there. The rest of the recipe is all about the onions and adding some flavors, just making sure to caramelize them as much as we can and then simmer the soup a little bit. Of course, it being Julia, she's gonna always add a little scotch of alcohol. So we've got some cognac and some white wine that we'll be adding, topping it with some gruyere and French bread, and hopefully getting it nice and brown and bubbly. No special tools or equipment, you just need a big stock pot. And then if you do want to follow the recipe to add the crispy bread and the melty brown cheese, you'll need some sort of a vessel that can both serve soup and also go underneath your broiler. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, I gotta get started slicing onions. My largest stock pot, this is 8 quarts, but you need at least a 5 or a 6 quart stock pot and a whole bunch of onions. Julia's recipe calls for 5 to 6 large onions, about 1.5 pounds. So I'm gonna do the full 6. As these cook, of course, they reduce down very significantly. Quick tip, people have a lot of opinions about everything, really, but in particular, there's a lot of different opinions on how to slice onions. I'm doing them a little bit differently than I normally would. I'm still cutting off the top and the tail, cutting them in half and removing the skins as always. But typically for my fastest way to cut an onion, I would do it this way, which is around the onion, just like that. But I have read that cutting the onion from pole to pole, so from the root end to the stem end, instead of around horizontally, that cutting the onions that way allows them to maintain some body in this onion soup versus just kind of turning into mush. Last one. That is a big pot of onions. So to that, I'm gonna add 3 tablespoons of butter and about a tablespoon of oil. And these onions are going on the stove, covered for like 15 to 20 minutes. So while our onions are on the stove starting to cook down and our stock is warming up, I'm going to prep our bread. So I have a nice French baguette here. I'm gonna use, not all of it, not that much. And Julia's recipe calls for basically making some big croutons. So we're gonna cut this into about 1 inch thick slices, put it on a baking sheet, drizzle it with some olive oil, and then put it in a preheated 325-degree oven. So there's just 2 of us eating today, so we don't need all that much bread. That's probably about the right amount. And so these are gonna go in that 325-degree oven for about 15 minutes, and then I'll flip them over in about 15 minutes. I'm definitely gonna set a timer, although this little one might alert me when things start to smell good. Into the oven these go. So the timer for my bread just went off, and I flipped it around, which means these onions have been cooking for about 15 minutes. I just added the salt and the sugar, just a very little bit of each, teaspoon of each. And I've cranked the heat, and now we're just gonna let these start to caramelize. So our onions have been in for 30 to 35 minutes. I know that because I just took the bread out. It had been in for 15 minutes on each side, and the onions are starting to get some beautiful brown color. They're almost to where I want them to be. The next step for us is to add in a couple tablespoons of flour and some stock to thicken the soup up. Then we'll add spices, wine, the rest of the stock once we've got a smooth mixture, and we're gonna let it rip for another 30 minutes or so. The goal here is to make sure that we have a really smooth, not clumpy mixture. You can already see how that flour is starting to thicken up those onions. Look at that deep, dark color. Oh, that's beautiful. I'm confident that our flour is mixed in well, so I'm gonna add the rest of the stock. And then in goes a bay leaf and a little bit of sage from last year's garden that I've just dried, so I'm gonna crush that a little bit. That goes in. About a cup of wine. Stir it all together. We're just gonna simmer this for like 30 minutes or so. Oh, I can't wait, this looks really good. We're ready. The soup has been simmering for another 25 minutes or so, and it is beautiful color. It's kind of exactly where I want it to be. So now I'm going to assemble a couple of portions of the soup. It's pretty simple. We're gonna add the soup, a little bit of cognac. This is totally optional though, but we know Julia liked a tipple. A little bit of grated onion, top it with some cheese, then the big crouton, some more cheese, some butter, off onto the broiler. Julia's recipe actually says to cook it for about 30 minutes in the oven, but I don't think we need to do that. The soup is piping hot, the bread is crusty, so I'm just gonna toss it in the broiler to melt the cheese. These are gonna go in the oven under my broiler just for a couple minutes until the cheese gets brown and bubbly, and I'm gonna keep a close eye on them because I don't want anything to burn. See you in a sec. And mere moments later, like 2 minutes, and I burned a little bit of the bread. This recipe makes me happy every time I make it. I don't know if it's that Julia was super goofy, which is so endearing to me, or that she also is really tall like me, or that she just really loved food like me, but I'm always really happy when I cook her recipes, especially the ones that are as simple as this. This is such a nice, comforting recipe and such a great use of beef stock. If you have homemade beef stock like we had in the kitchen today, that beef stock works beautifully for a French onion soup. It's kind of a celebration of all things bouillon, as Julia calls it, and onion, which, how can you go wrong with those two flavors? Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I really appreciate it. Please subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like me to cook more of Julia's recipes. Some of them are wild, and I'll look forward to seeing you here next time. Cheers!